I'd like to call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming out in this bad weather. And I'd like to ask Commissioner Gorman if you'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. The clerk to read the roll call. Am I on?
No.
No, you're not.
Hello? Okay. Representative Davis?
Here.
Representative Tierney?
Here.
Senator Rochford?
Here.
Jennifer Ramsey? Patrick Hackley, designate. That's Will Gwynn. Myself, Mark Brady. Commissioner Gorman?
Here.
Representative Willett?
Here.
Michael Phelps?
Here.
Chris Fife?
Here.
Eric Murphy?
Here.
Matt Mayberry?
Here.
And Charlie Levesque.
Excused.
Excused. Okay.
Thank you. Next item is approval of minutes. Does everybody have a copy of the minutes? They're at the door if you need one. I have one request from Mr. Thomas Hahn. He would like a change in the minutes. He would like it, there's a place in the minutes that say, Mr. Hahn said that he is a member of the Granite State Division of the Society of American Foresters, and a subcommittee is conducting an analysis of the implications of carbon sequestration to the timber yield tax, which he would like to have come testify. And he would like that replaced with, Mr. Hahn said that he is a member of a subcommittee of the Granite State Division of the Society of American Foresters that is performing a detailed study of the timber yield tax and the current use forest land tax assessment formula. The goal of the subcommittee is to come up with better ways for overall fair and equitable forest land and timber taxation in the state. He stated that he is not representing the Granite State Division, but from that study, he has detailed knowledge of the timber yield tax and current use forest land tax assessment history and systems. He said that if it would help the commission in its work, the subcommittee might be able to make a presentation, if allowed, by the Granite State Division of Executive Committee. Signed, Thomas Hahn. So is there any discussion? Can I get a motion to amend the minutes to reflect this? I get a second? I have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So if everybody has had a few minutes to read over the minutes from September's meeting, is there any discussion of the minutes? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve as amended.
Second?
Second.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Minutes are approved as amended. Okay. The next item on the agenda was a hearing of landowners. There's been several last-minute cancellations. We had Mr. Birdie and Mr. Lemire were going to speak, but they had conflicting meetings for today and will not be here. I believe the American Forestry Foundation had someone that's not coming. I've got a member, landowner from New Hampshire, Coos County, who's supposed to be here. I don't see him here. And So I'm out of speakers. I do have a letter from Ross Karen, who's a landowner and a forester from Coos County. And this is, I've got copies here if anybody would like them. This is just his opinion as a landowner. And I'd like to read that. I'm a log buyer, forester, and landowner with 28 years of experience in the northern New England forest products industry. Except for 4 years of college, I've always lived in Coos County. I'm fundamentally opposed to the sale of carbon credits because of what's known as leakage. Whatever products are removed from the market due to carbon sales must be replaced with products from somewhere else, negating any possible benefits. I believe having diverse local markets, healthy and productive forests, and a stable supply chain provides greater benefits than the sale of carbon. Ross Karen, October 20th, 2025. Now that's an opinion statement. We were hoping to have, I do have a speaker here. Got Eamon Kelly, the Honorable Eamon Kelly, is going to speak on, I believe, land as a landowner representative for White Mountain Lumber. And I'm not sure if you're representing the Randolph Forest as well.
Thank you, Chairman. I brought a letter from the Randolph Town Forest, or from the president of the Randolph Town Forest,
Okay,
to share
thank
with the
you.
committee. My name is Eamon Kelly. First time being called honorable. It's a weird one. I'll speak today as a landowner, or as on behalf of White Mountain Lumber as a landowner in the Coos County. So my name's Eamon Kelly. My family owns and operates White Mountain Lumber in Berlin, New Hampshire. We're a third-generation sawmill that has operated in Coos County since 1945. I was asked to speak today from a landowner's perspective, so I'll save most of the sawmill discussion for a future meeting. But I will mention that mills exist here only because working forests do. The mills that once covered Massachusetts and Connecticut have nearly all vanished as land around them transitioned to a mix of development and strict conservation. I've spoken with dozens of landowners in Coos County on this topic, and I may not be an expert in the field, but I will do my best to convey their thoughts. I know many of them expressed interest in attending this hearing, but it's quite a commitment to attend an in-person hearing in Concord in the middle of a Wednesday morning. Many are relying on their industry trade groups to speak on their behalf and believe they will support what is right for the future of New Hampshire forests. It has honestly surprised me to learn that just how many of these groups have already been approached to sell carbon credits. Town forests, conservation groups, forest managers, and industrial owners have all shared similar stories with me. The vast majority heard the offers and chose to decline them, and nearly everyone did so for the same reason. It wasn't because the economics didn't make sense. Oftentimes, they were being offered what would equate to decades worth of traditional forest income. They rejected them because they believed those practices didn't fit with New Hampshire's legacy model of forest stewardship. That is not the bulwark that we should treat it as. Many of the people who run these groups were raised in New Hampshire at a time when the forest products industry touched nearly every family in the state. Today, forest industry jobs account for less than 3% of total employment in the state. The next generation will not feel the same sense of obligation or admiration for legacy forest practices. In fact, many will likely see their fiduciary responsibilities above all other factors, and the economics are only getting worse for traditional harvesting. The value of standing timber is not keeping up with the cost of operating. At the same time, the alternative investment market, to which carbon belongs, is booming as a lack of federal regulation has made them more enticing and more regulated investment markets. Financial products that monetize the conservation of soil and water resources are the next frontier. Many are being sold on forest land where carbon was sold a decade ago as carbon project developers look for new ways to get value from their past investments. New Hampshire must act now to craft a future that still includes working forests. Unless we're planning a total repeal of the timber tax, then we must at the very least put these activities on the same level playing field as traditional harvesting. If we want to incentivize shorter agreements or agreements that include some harvesting, then our only option is to first implement some fiscal penalty on that activity. Otherwise, we are endorsing and subsidizing all forms of these agreements. The imposed cost doesn't have to be prohibitive, but it should at least be equalized to traditional forest income and is replacing. When the timber tax was set at the 10% rate, it is in 1948, it was an estimate for how much towns would forgo to the loss of property taxes on standing timber. A commission was set up to monitor the level over the next decade and ultimately agreed with that original 10% estimation. We can do the same with carbon. We can do the same with these markets. We have statewide forest groups that look at the value of timber and set a value for timber every year to set the current use rates. We can do that. That commission's already looking at these markets. They're already looking at these products. We can simply include carbon in that assessment. That's my personal, prescription. But thank you for your time.
Damon, would you take a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
This may not be exactly what you came down here for, but I've spoken with you many times on the history of timber tax. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I know you, given your line of work, you are very knowledgeable about that.
Yeah, I can pull up my past testimony on timber tax, and my grandfather actually was one of the was a senator at the time, 1948, and he helped institute the timber tax in the state. It has remained almost unchanged since that time, remarkably unchanged since 1945, 1948. The idea at the time was that timber was that forest land was being clear cut because it made much more sense to clear cut land than it did because the standing timber had value, and therefore if you clear cut the land, then you don't have to pay on any of the standing timber. So trees that were even, pulp and paper trees, smaller trees, were seen as a deterrent or a prohibitive cost to owning land. So the idea was, well, let's clear the land completely, and then we won't have to pay as much in property taxes next year, even if it didn't make sense for good forest management practices. That behavior, the idea was to come up with some idea to not only stop that behavior, but also to provide a good framework for the forest products industry here in New Hampshire. So what was eventually agreed to after a very long multi-year process was a timber tax that would be assessed at the time that the lumber was harvested. That money was meant to offset the property taxes that the towns were currently collecting. And just like it is today, the forest land in New Hampshire was spread out in a patchwork framing. So there were towns that had a higher levels of forest and those that had lower. And there are also different levels of property taxes being assessed on that timber. So some towns would say, well, that timber's worth this. Or other towns would rely on the landowners to set their own value on that timber, or they would trust them in their assessment. So you had a different network of taxes being assessed across properties. Sometimes it would be more costly to own timberland in Berlin or in Dummer than it would be in Milan, just the next town over, and that would lead to bad forestry practices across different areas of the state. So by assessing a 10% tax and then setting that value on that timber, by the market, what they were doing is they're saying that we're going to have a statewide thing. It's going to cross over between towns so that you can have larger forest parcels that would, have the same forest management practices on either side of the border. What was best for the forest instead of what was best for, the town or the property. That was definitely contentious at the time. Some towns got hurt by it. Some towns worked out better in it. And the state actually set up a fund that was meant to offset the amount of property taxes that towns were losing. But eventually we got to where we are today, and that's pretty much what it was back in 1948.
Thank you. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Thank you for taking my question. So, listening to the history of the timber tax as you explained it, is it fair to say that the town's people, taxpayers, subsidize the property owners until that timber is cut? And then they do it. But as an overall budget, as long as the wood isn't cut right now and they're not collecting timber tax, the town taxpayers are subsidizing the forest land's tax base.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that statement.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Fife.
Thanks for your the information you provided. I'm curious, how much land does White Mountain own? And then could you characterize the other landowners that you spoke with as far as just sort of size, I guess?
Yeah, so White Mountain Lumber controls approximately 2,000 acres. We're larger, but not the largest, obviously. The community forests are mainly 80 to 200 acres, I would say, that both Milan and Randolph wanted to be here today, or at least expressed interest in providing some testimony to the committee. But I've spoken to people from all backgrounds. This is a very popular topic in forestry circles in Coos County. So I think that if you can't spend more than 10 minutes talking to a forester or a logger or somebody, and then having this come up, especially when they found out that I was a former state representative, it's something that was brought up quite often. And shared a very similar view. In fact, I was surprised that when these conversations took place in many of these groups, that we're talking, 10 years ago, some of them were being presented with carbon credit plans or presented some form of investment that involved conserving land for carbon. So over that time, in my mind, in my personal experience with the topic, it's been since Connecticut Headwaters in early 2021, which these presentations and the declines that these groups did, or decisions that they made, predate that by 4 or 5 years. So the idea that this is a growing thing, it's here now, and that sentiment towards it just didn't fit with what we saw the forest being. That is not something that is set in stone. They do have their own. Each group is, has their own set of guiding principles and standards, but those can change over time. And so as new people who are less familiar with the forest industry, come back to New Hampshire or move here. Not being from New Hampshire, they will bring with them a different sense of what a forest should be and how much experience they have in that area. So,
Yes.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the landowners that you're speaking of, that you spoke with, are they in that 2,000 to, the 800 to 2,000 acre size range, or?
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of people, everybody. I've spoken to land managers who have much larger than 2,000, who are responsible for that. I don't think they can publicly say the things they tell me privately. But I think that there's a sense that those type of agreements don't fit with what they have seen as their traditional forest role.
Thank you.
Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, without getting too deep in the weeds, I'm wondering if you could help me understand, or if you're familiar with clearly measuring the yield tax, the timber tax on a log laying on a truck is one thing, but how in the past were they able to come up with a measurement for standing timber? How did that, do you know how that worked?
Prior to 1948, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in your research.
It would vary by tax collector. So it would that's why they would say, we know, we went to the sawmill, we asked them what they got for that piece of wood, or how much they would get for a 16-inch 40-foot log. And that person had direct knowledge of it, they may assess it much higher. Whereas other towns would rely on the town next to them. So if they didn't have a very strong, or a full-time tax assessor, they would go to the town next door and say, what do you guys charge for timber? and they would charge the same.
So they would literally walk through the forest and measure and look at the trees that are standing?
They would, I think that what I've read is that they would assess it based off of the forest makeup. So if it was a hardwood stand or a softwood stand, again, it varied by district and by place. There's stories, anecdotal stories of people being assessed because they wanted the company to sell. They wanted Brown Company to sell a parcel of land, and so Berlin would assess a higher tax on, suddenly the cost of softwood in Berlin is much higher because most of the softwood is held by the Brown Company, and therefore they wanted them to sell a single parcel. Those are anecdotal stories, but it did vary considerably from town to town.
But at some point, somebody has to look at a piece of land and come up with a density number to estimate the tax.
Yeah, and they're doing those type of calculations for carbon projects currently. They look at they're much stronger mathematicians than me who are creating these documents that they then submit to a carbon credit certifier. So those documents exist, and they're putting a value on that product. So it would make sense to then take that value, just like we would when someone sells a property and we reassess their value on that property based off what it's sold for. Makes sense to then say that, okay, you're giving a value here for that product, and we're assessing a tax or a levy on that product.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry. One other question following on Representative Willette's question, just understanding the timber tax and this idea of subsidizing. So is it that the town then is basically lowering the tax rate and essentially taking a lower property tax over time? Is the idea that when the landowner then harvests those trees, the town is made whole by the timber tax?
That was the idea, and that's what the commission found. It was like 1955, 1956, something. They released their study report that found that was approximately what was lost and what was gained. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Senator Rocha.
Yes, thank you. So just to go back to 1948 when the timber tax was established, just based on what you've said, I don't believe there was ever an intention to stop logging entirely. It was designed to ensure that good practices were implemented, that the tax base was solidified or stabilized anyway. So would you agree that, if I've understood you correctly, that there was never the intention for the timber tax to stop? It was just, we know you're going to cut the tree. You may not cut it this year. You may cut it in 10 years, and we'll get our money at that time when the tree is cut.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
They would, yeah.
And then follow up?
Yes.
And I know you've been here in the legislature, and I wonder if and I know this has been a topic that you've worked on. I wonder if you could just describe some of the things that you've tried doing here in the legislature and some of your initiatives, and where pros, cons, where you ran into trouble in this process.
Yeah, of course. I think I should lean on Arnie a little bit and say that it wasn't just me. I think a lot of people here in this room did a lot of work on those topics. But from my personal experience in the legislature, I proposed and I put through a piece of legislation that would have put a 10% tax on the value of the property at the time. And the arguments that I heard against it, part of it was that the industry is still developing. We don't know what it's going to look like here in New Hampshire, so we're moving too fast. We're moving too quickly. We need to slow down and assess where we're at currently, and before we move forward with something that is, broad-based and affects everybody. The other argument was that we're going to be assessing a value or putting a tax on an activity where we don't do tax on things like hunting agreements, other uses of forest land that are currently getting value, but we don't tax. My argument against that has always been that those activities, specifically hunting and hunting agreements, they do not prohibit the harvesting of that timber. They don't even harm the timberland itself. We're not changing. You can still harvest the timber 30 years from now. You can still do the exact activity you plan to do on that land. You're just generating additional revenue. And I think in most cases that revenue was not nearly the level that we're talking about for these carbon agreements. Definitely not the timeframes that we're talking about for these carbon agreements. You could change the hunting agreement might be for a few years, might be for 1 year. You know, you could say, well, we don't want any, you know, they're tearing up the land with ATVs, or tearing up the land for some when they're going to get their hunt, and that we don't want that activity anymore, so we're going to terminate the agreement. I don't think that you can do that with most carbon agreements. And so the like part of the reason that they're being sold here instead of being sold abroad is because we as a society provide some level of legal support to those agreements. So if you allow them to be ripped up, then they're not worth anything. So again, I think that, back to your original question, that was the argument that I heard, and I don't think it was a fair argument. I also think it's very difficult when we're talking about conservation. A lot of people who see this as a conservation tool, and to that, I look around New Hampshire, and there are a number of large land conservation groups operating in the state. There's a map that's online. You can look it up. The UNH compiles every year that shows how, you know, where they operate, who operates where. If you wanted to conserve land in your state, in your town, they tell you who you can contact, who will help you, you know, put your land into a conservancy. So like there are conservation routes that the state is subsidizing or is, you know, helping exist, and that currently exists. So I don't think that carbon as a tool for conservation is necessary at this point. And, you know, as I said, the economics are working against forestry. So like it's becoming harder and harder to harvest on a smaller and smaller parcel. So that's natural conservancy through the market, you know, through the inability to harvest land. I also think that there are areas that are undevelopable that they're selling as carbon credits on as developable land, and they're saying that that's why it has value, when the reality on the ground is that places like Coas County, which I know you're aware of, are not in danger of development because we are dealing with a lack of, you know, a reason to exist. So the idea that you need the carbon credits to stop development there is laughable.
Okay, we're kind of getting off track here. Eamon speaking as a,
No,
did you have another?
I'm going to hold that for later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, you had a letter from the Randolph Forest.
Yeah, I'll pass it out. It's from Mark Kelly, to be addressed to Arnie.
You do? Okay. Mark has a question for us.
Eamon, you mentioned in your opening remarks, you know, you talk about the, you know, our ethos of forestry in New Hampshire and legacy, everything else. Then you made a comment. You said about the incentivize the shorter agreements and a distinction. And there's a distinction in years that we know about, that you have, it seems like these smaller landowners and these companies that aggregate the smaller land, parcel it together, are in 40-year agreements. And then you have firms, I think like Aurora, whatever, and the big guys that are in the 100-year agreements. I want to just dive into that a little bit. In like, to me, 100-year creates a lot of different questions that a 40-year doesn't. Because a 40-year agreement, I guess to a degree, I'm not a forester, but we got a bunch of you here. You know, at the end of the day, what's had a life cycle, a little more than a life cycle traditionally? I don't know. So you can kind of match it up, so to speak, and you can match the carbon with that life cycle, and it doesn't maybe alter a lot. But when you're talking 100 years and you lock a piece of property in for 100 years, it's supposed to generate, to me, that just seems different. I want, from your perspective as a landowner, as a, you know, what do you think of that?
Yeah. I mean, I won't see the end of a 100-year agreement. Like that's the truth.
None of us.
And none of it. Yeah. So what happens, we can't get homes to stand for 100 years, let alone an agreement to stand for 100 years. So I definitely have questions about who's going to be enforcing that agreement at the end of it. But in terms of a 40-year agreement, I think that there is when people are misinformed, uninformed, there is a sense that, oh, look, we're buying carbon credits in a 40-year agreement. That's great. But if they weren't planning to harvest on that for 40 years, well, then did you actually sequester any carbon, or are you just selling extra value on that existing footprint? I think that, like, it's great if you can fool somebody into buying that, but what does that actually do? What is it actually accomplishing what they think it's going to accomplish? No. I think that just like we have a recreational incentive, so like if you have a current use land and you allow people to recreate, you get a lower rate. We first have to have a rate first to then offer some type of incentive to get that behavior that we want. I personally just don't see the value in these carbon credits in the short term, especially these 20, 30, 40-year agreements. Like I have problems with the math. I'm not an expert mathematician, but I definitely I see holes. And so I don't see the point of doing them. But if people are willing to buy them, if people are willing to invest and provide additional value to forest land, all power to them. But I don't think that as soon as you start getting into those multi-life cycle timeframes, the 80 years, the 100 years, I think that then we're looking at having a serious economic impact on other industries. And yeah, it's not good for the economy up there.
I get one other question. So, and you made the point that, when you introduced your legislation and some of the critiques of your legislation, and you just used the word incentivize again, and, you were trying to do what we're trying to do, what Representative Davis has tried to do, and you said the characterization was that, well, it's too new right now. You can't do that. We can't inhibit this new industry or whatever it may be. It may be a new revenue stream, for landowners or whatever. But the fact is that if you don't somehow put the carbon sequestration that you're making the money off of those trees, that land, you have incentivized. Right now, there's a 10% incentivization for Aurora specifically. Okay, I mean, it's a fact. It's just a fact. So the state, if it doesn't do anything, has incentivized carbon. You think that's a fair statement?
Yes, and they've incentivized it with municipal funds. They're not incentivizing it with state funds. They're not incentivizing it with their own funds. They're doing it with county funds. They're doing it with municipal funds by the tax rate, and those towns will have to go up to cover the services that already exist. Yes.
And then one last follow-up.
Yes.
And then to go back to the 40 to 100 again, and you talked about, you just said you get into the real economic ramifications if you get into the 80, 100 years. And it's difficult for any of us to really score any of this out 100 years from now. I mean, who's kidding who? But it goes back to our point. What we've been saying is that we'd always said we could be carbon neutral from a public policy perspective up north. I think a bunch of us said that. Maybe carbon sequestration was the best thing to hit this state. I don't know, and it's going to generate enough revenue for all of us that, okay, that's fine. It's not going to be not a net negative from the status quo. Maybe it becomes a net positive and we can all live with it. But again, a carbon sequestration dollar income tax or whatever is not the same as a traditional yielded, harvested, because when you're harvesting the trees you go to, they're going to be at these mills or whatever. Okay, but when you're doing the carbon sequester, I would assume you're not harvesting as much, and therefore it does affect the industry much more than the traditional way of managing our forest. It's a different Do you agree with
I
that?
would absolutely agree with that. There is a sense of community that comes from being there in the forest. That there a sense of obligation to the forest, to the land itself. To what you're leaving behind for your children. These agreements exist on paper, and they may be a forest product, but it is a forest product that can be bought and sold anywhere in the world. So it is not something that relies on you having fundamental knowledge of your community, of your surroundings, of how the forest affects those people around you. And you can make decisions on paper that you don't have to see the ramifications for. I think that there's a world where the entire state of New Hampshire is sequestered, and we're 84% forested, and we lock up 84% of the state. And at that point, it's like, well, what is the state? What are we if people don't live there? If people can't live there? If they can't derive a sense of income locally, then why live there? Why be there? So that's my personal.
Yeah, and I'll finish. In our submission, to the state on the Aurora second stewardship proposal last October, we referenced in there on the economic analysis, we referenced the federal government. There is their labor factor that they use on forestry, and it is for every 100 jobs or one job, you get another 220 jobs. So for every 100, you get another 220. That's the labor economic factor on that. The point being that if you do the carbon sequestration, you lose that. And I don't think anybody has done, which may be an exercise to do. Can somebody figure out what if you do take 15, 20, 30%? And that is what we're concerned about in COAS with the unincorporated places, 23 of the 25. And the Warehouser has, got some property in our unincorporated places. If you were to just take 20, 30%, 40% of that land and just sequester it, that has economic implications. That's why we're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Take one more question.
Thank you for taking my question. This is kind of an opinion that you had. A few years ago, I was on a job site up between Errol and Milan on a commercial forest, and I was in there with a logger and spent a couple days with him, working with him for a couple days. And what he was doing, he's taking some nice, doing a nice cut, taking out the beech, the soft maple, the white birch, leaving the nice young yellow birch, hard maple, and looking, saying, 30, 35 years, it'll be a tremendous lot with a lot of veneer, really high grading that lot. And it was fun to work with them for those few days. And then I go back 2 years ago, and they're cutting it again. And I asked him, so why are you cutting this again? He said, well, we're owned by an insurance company. The stockholders want dividends. We're back here cutting it. So in this carbon sequestration and the forestry that's got to go along with it, do you have concerns that the best forestry practices and maybe animal habitat will come second to stockholder ambitions?
Absolutely. I think that, that's what I mentioned, that the next frontier is soil and water contracts or soil and water things. We look at what's going on in Nashua right now, the uproar around, a water rights contract here in the middle of the state. I think that you look at it from the shareholder's perspective, and if the price of carbon is down and they can't sell carbon, well, what can we sell on? We don't have any money to leverage to buy new land for carbon projects. So what can we do? We can take our existing revenue and lock it down further. So if we lock up things for soil or water conservation, what do those contracts look like? I don't think we've seen a lot of them yet. So to draw a clear thing, but does it make it harder for people to get water in their house, in their home? Does it make it harder for them to do the other activities that they rely on? Does the soil conservation contract and the Connecticut Headwaters, does that make it so that they can't ride any ATVs up near and then they're suing the government to try to stop them from riding anywhere because that's what the contract says they have to do. And then those people who operate those businesses go out of business. That's a real knock-on effect that they won't, again, have to see the effect of because they're doing things on paper in a boardroom somewhere.
All right. Yes, I'll allow another question. Sorry to keep you on the hot seat so long.
Following up on that same idea, as you kind of painted the picture, I think very well of the challenges right now of owning timberland, the values, because of markets. We know that affects loggers, and loggers' costs have increased. And so for a landowner to have a harvest done, it's increased cost there. It sounds like the tax savings, if you want to call it that, to the landowner from this contract that was made back in 1948 aren't covering the costs of managing that land in the way that, you know, it can grow those higher quality products, which I think you stated was the intent, to not clear cut, to be able to do something else to grow value for the landowner and for the economy. That being said, do you think that carbon projects could actually facilitate, be a revenue source for a landowner to do that kind of management so that they could extend their rotation an additional 40 years, 20 years to get from pulpwood or a smaller, lower quality saw log into a larger quality saw log or veneer? And once those are harvested, isn't the value from the timber tax point of view to the town actually higher because it's based on a higher value product?
Yeah, I agree. I think that you can use these tools. These tools can be used to do that, to do, incentivize better forestry practice. I think that the most interesting thing I found from looking back at old timber tax stuff was that in 1948 they were complaining about the percentage of New Hampshire forests that were low value, because it led to these clear cuts that then grew up and grew low value timber rapidly. And you look at the percentage, and it's actually the percentage of the New Hampshire forests that were low value at that point, and they're actually lower than they are today. And which is interesting, because the idea was that, okay, we're going to incentivize better timber, better timberland use. And part of that is because after the mills started leaving and things started, the large industrial owners stopped treating it as a farmland, as harvest, that you ended up with bad forestry management practices in areas being split up into smaller parcels that couldn't be managed effectively or couldn't be managed fiscally soundly. And so the idea that we can get to a better forest products industry, like a better value, that you can go into a forest and know you're going to get enough value to leave standing timber to create a new generation of good crops, that will be harvested in 30 or 40 years. I think that that was good. That'd be a good thing to get to. I just don't know if not doing anything is the right way to get to that. If we can, as a body, or as a state, incentivize that behavior over agreements that just lock land down, I think that'd be a good thing. That I would agree with that, and I'd support that. I just don't know if not doing anything will lead to that. I think we're more likely to see people looking at 84% forested New Hampshire with lower regulation than the state of Maine next door, and saying, well, let's create these products in New Hampshire.
Very good point, Chris. Okay. Seeing no more questions, thank you, Eamon.
Thank you all for your time. Thanks.
I want to apologize for not having more speakers here. We had several last-minute cancellations yesterday, actually. They've all agreed to come back at a later date, and I think it's very important we hear from landowners that are in carbon projects right now to see what their challenges are, how everything's working out for them. So that will be at a future meeting. Did everybody get the letter from Mark Kelly? Did it get around to the other side? Mark represents, I believe is it 10,000 acres, the Randolph Community Forest? Oh, they have it over there. Over 11,000 acres, so he couldn't be here because of work, but he's brought this letter. Is there any new business, anything anybody would like to bring up? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't, who do I contact to make sure I'm notified about these meetings? Because if I
I-
hadn't talked to Chris,
I put you on the list,
great, thank you, sir.
with the woman in the office this morning. I apologize for that.
No, no problem. Thank you.
And, while we're here, Matt Mayberry
Yes,
is the newest member.
I am. I'm the CEO of the New Hampshire Home Builders Association.
All right, thank you. Uh, It, I'm gonna set up a roadmap that I'll have at the next meeting, so we will know our agendas ahead of time. I think there's people that we need to hear from, DRA, other, maybe the municipal association, some tax implications that go along with this. I would like to hear from landowners that are in carbon projects. I was trying to separate it to the smaller landowners and have the larger come later. Maybe we do one where they're all here at once, whether they have a 20 or 40-year project or whether they have a 100-year project, that might be easier to get them all here. But that's something that I will try to get an agenda, and then we'll go over it at the next meeting.
Can I just clarify on that? Are you, those are two different things, because small landowners can have different lengths of projects, and large landowners can have different lengths of projects.
Okay.
So are you looking for length of project to segregate out who speaks, or size of landowner?
I thought it would be easier to separate the smaller landowners from the larger landowners. It would be a lot, if everybody came in at once, it might be confusing, I'm not sure. What would you think?
More confusing than it is now. For me, anyway.
All right.
Chairman,
Yes,
are we allowed to do field hearings? Can we go to them?
yeah, I think we could.
Just because, they work hard. Everybody works hard. They work really hard, and where we don't have a Zoom capability to take their testimony remotely, maybe
I think
go to
we
them.
may. I'm gonna check with, Charlie Levesque puts on a presentation about carbon, and I would like to see if, he's traveling right now. I would like to see if we could have have it set up so he could give us a Zoom presentation for our next meeting. And hopefully, I'll find out after the meeting,
Okay.
whether we can do that or not.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're talking to the least, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to electronics. I know nothing about it, but I can get it set up. Next meeting, November 19th. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, one other piece of business. You mentioned when Mr. Kelly was speaking about past legislation. I think that was brought up, and I saw there are a couple of LSRs for legislation for this coming session. I think Representative Willett, you have one. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share that language with the commission, just to help us understand, kind of the issues that you're looking at, given our scope on the impact of carbon on communities.
I would I will share the language when I have it. But what the thought was on that piece of legislation is just to make sure that we're good stewards of our forest. I think I'm still kind of an old Yankee, and I believe that landowners should have a right to do what they want with their property. And if they want to go on carbon, that's fine. But I want to make sure that we're doing the best forest management plans and we're taking care of our animal habitat. And this is what my legislation is. It's not to try to stop carbon or tax carbon. It's just to make sure that we're managing our forest properly and we're taking care of our animals.
But it's specific to properties with carbon projects, not all property.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I'd like to try to schedule our next meeting, November 19th. It's a Wednesday. Anybody have a conflict with that?
I do, but
Okay.
Or is there any way to do it earlier?
Boy, yeah, it's less than a month right now.
I
I'm
meant
trying to
earlier
keep
in
it,
the
bef-
day,
oh,
like do it 8 to 10 or.
we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we got 6 coming from COAS. Makes it tough to get them down here earlier.
I can figure it out. Nobody else has a conflict. I can figure it out.
I'm
Okay.
away that day, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't have it without me.
Okay. If I can get the presentation, it's worth seeing. I think you may have seen it before.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right, I know you have conflicts after that,
Yeah.
in the 20th? Is it Thursday? I think the clerk has something on the 18th. Do you? You said 17th and
Hold on
18th.
1 second. Gotta finalize our county budget for the 17th. So let me see what the 18th and what are we looking at, the 18th or the
20th,
20th of November?
November, yeah.
Okay. 18th. Let's see. Okay. Does the 18th work better for? Yeah. All right. Let's.
You, Dave, the 18th?
That whole week is tough for me.
Okay.
I'm traveling.
And you're all set with the 18th? Okay. November 18th, 10 o'clock. And that's a Tuesday. Right. But getting a motion to adjourn? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Who made a motion to adjourn?
I believe it was Matt Mayberry,
And who seconded?
Jim Turney. We found somebody quicker than Jim.
Matt's quicker than Jim.
All right, thank you.